everyone, today we're going to get you on your way to mastering the explosive artist Fuse. We have a lot to talk about, from tips for all his abilities, ranking him in today's meta, and some gameplay examples. Let's get to it. Quickly breaking down all of his abilities, Fuse is a member of the Assault class, meaning he does carry more ammo per stack, and he can open the red supply bins around the map. Carrying more ammo directly benefits him more than the other Assault legends, as Fuse's passive ability is Grenadier, which does let him carry 2 grenades per stack, and thus he gets to conserve more bag space for grenades due to the class he is in. The passive ability also lets Fuse sling grenades via his grenade arm, which allows for much faster, more precise, and more lethality from range when using grenades. The tactical is the Knuckle Cluster, which allows him to get 2 charges of more or less mini grenades that explode upon impact. The initial stick will do 10 damage to enemies, and then the cluster does an additional 5 to 10 damage per hit in the area where it does explode for 6 seconds. The cluster can deal upwards of about 50 to 60 damage if players do not move outside of it, and the clusters have a nice 20-second timer, and we will have a lot more on these in a moment. Fuse's ultimate ability though is the Mother Load, which does allow Fuse to shoot a large ring of fire onto the ground to trap and or damage enemies who do come in contact with the ring. Before we go over tons of ways to use his abilities, if you are wondering why you would want to pick Fuse or what he excels at, Fuse is for someone that wants an explosive orientated character who is all about chaos. Fuse can excel at all ranges, and it depends on the player, but in my opinion, Fuse really shines towards the end game when players cannot quite move around as much without getting penalized for it. As a Fuse player, you will require a ton of self-discipline to not throw or use your abilities in a way that is wasteful. Fuse's passive especially requires him to control his grenade usage, because as soon as you do run out of grenades, you now do not have a passive ability. My general recommendation is to hold at minimum 2 grenades or 1 stack, and this can extend all the way up to 8 grenades depending on the bag you have. On screen is my preferred or optimal inventory as a Fuse if you are wondering how many grenades to carry at each bag level. I generally do not recommend a certain loadout based on the legend you are playing, but the truth is for Fuse, and a big recommendation I do want to give is to try and use lower ammo weapons. To name a few, guns like the 30-30 repeater, the longbow, the wingman, the sentinel sniper, and really any shotgun is going to be a great option. By using these lower ammo weapons, you will be able to save more inventory space for grenades, and thus you are going to increase the amount of offensive plays that you can make. A healthy mix of grenades is going to benefit you the most, as it better prepares you for any engagement, but at minimum, arc stars are the first priority, then frag grenades, and then thermites. This is not a grenade guide video. If you want more on specific grenade tactics, and after this video is done, you can check out my grenade guide. I do want to briefly circle back to arc stars. Since Fuse gets increased speed and accuracy via his grenade sling or grenade arm, opening with an arc star stick on an enemy player is absolutely insane. This is easily done from further ranges, and it's one of the best ways to open engagements with an immediate advantage. This is why arc stars are my first priority. Second to this though, and again, since Fuse has more formidable speed with nades, bouncing frag grenades off of walls to breach further into areas is a solid way to force movement if you can't quite throw a grenade in a traditional manner. However, if enemies are camped up on high ground and you want to vert nade or sky nade someone, you can and should toggle the grenade arm off, as it will let you throw a grenade normally. And while this is a specific example of not using the grenade arm, just know that this option to throw nades, like all the other legends, is something that you should always be aware of. One specific gun that Fuse does get a slight enhancement with is going to be the Rampage. Since Fuse can hold 2 thermites per stack, he can charge up that Rampage more frequently. If you do like, or if you do want to use this gun, you should keep this in mind. And while the gold bag benefits all legends by carrying extra big heals per stack, note that Fuse is honestly the #1 legend to get the gold bag. It will allow him to carry more nades, which we have already identified is quite important. Being able to consistently apply pressure is very important, and Fuse's tactical cluster does let him do this a little bit better, but before this, there are exceptions to this rule. If an enemy is camped in a building, or if you need to push someone, maybe like as a ring 3 is at your back and closing, you can unload all your ordnance to make that big play if needed, but for the most part, control yourself, don't panic, and just sling everything at once. This really is not the way. As we move on to Fuse's tactical and ultimate tips, be sure to check out my pinned comment down below for all changes to to Fuse since the launch of this video. I'll also let you know how he is faring in today's meta and if this guide is no longer relevant. While Fuse is all about big damage and explosive, Fuse's tactical of the two 20-second knuckle clusters is more so about creating opportunities, applying pressure, and then a little damage. As outlined at the start, this cluster shoots like a mini grenade. Upon impact, it's going to do 10 damage, and then it's going to explode, popping mini clusters of damage in a certain area. If you do stick someone, once the cluster explodes, players can move out of that area where it is exploding. The damage doesn't follow and track that player or that object. This seems simple, but it is actually the basis and the foundation of Fuse's kit. Since players can move out of the damage, you will be able to use the cluster to apply pressure on enemies and force their movement. This is why spacing out your tactical clusters is so important, as it's going to let you really control engagements without others even realizing it. The cluster can be used to flush enemies who are peeking from high ground while you rotate, or they can be used to force movement on players camping in a small area like inside a building or behind a rock. Additionally to forcing movement, even if they take 10 damage, they now have the pop a shield cell, and thus you are slowing them down even more. If all of this is not enough, and this may seem like you are forcing movement, which you are, but in turn you are also actually opening and creating time for movement for yourself and your team. So if you can, a rotation properly spaced out like this works great. Cluster, sling a nade, cluster, ultimate, nade, cluster, and so on. If properly spacing and timing this, you can actually apply constant pressure for upwards of 2 minutes, which is an absolute power move at the end game when space is hard to come by. This does mean Fuse actually gains more potential the longer on a match goes, due to players being unable to move out of the grenades and the clusters without getting obliterated, since the ring is already smaller. A specific tip that I can give is that if enemies are pushing your area, you can drop a cluster or two in a choke point to stop enemy movement. Either they're gonna have to push through the cluster and get weakened up, or they will stall out, and it can give you a moment to reposition or reset through healing, or maybe even reviving a player. Also, both the tactical and ultimate abilities are really just so great to disorient enemy players, as the audio is a fine way to cover up you doing certain actions like reviving that friendly or popping that battery or phoenix kit. If you are looking to make an offensive play with the cluster by flushing enemies out, a fine way to predict enemy player movement is to cluster one side of an object, and then you and or the team focus fire the opposite side, as the cluster is 99% of the time gonna force them to move right into your line of sight, which you should already be pre-aiming at. Also, clusters are so easy to just finish knocked enemies. Just dropping one cluster and a couple rounds into a knocked player is a very simple and easy way to finish and confirm your kills. A quick tip I do want to mention is that Fuse is one of the most superior legends when it does come to pushing or fighting any rampart with amped walls, Newcastle and his ultimate castle wall, or even sometimes Watson fences and caustic gas. This is simply because his knuckle clusters really just completely annihilate these fortification or defensive abilities, and Fuse is one of the best to breach into these areas. Fuse's ultimate, the Motherload, has some really unique ways that you can make plays with a little bit more lethality than clusters, but if you ever want to find others to play with, or you can ask questions to my community, hop in my community Discord to never play with randoms. Also, leave a like on this video. These guys take a ton of time, and I really do appreciate the support. At first glance, the Motherload is a really great way to damage enemies, but in reality, this ability is so much more than just this. Players that get hit by the Motherload can get out of it and not take extreme damage if they are quick. This shows by an initial 10 hit of damage, and those who do not move out of the fire, or if they walk into it, will take just a flat 35 damage, and then they are going to get ticked for even more damage, 8 per second for 5 seconds, meaning players are going to get hurt a total of 75 damage if they are in that fire. Because players take ticks of damage and burn for 5 seconds, this is actually a great way to recon and track enemy movement. Likewise, enemies are slowed during the burn, which is going to make it even easier to push up and get the knock. And if all this is not enough, enemies are also scanned if they are stuck inside that ring of fire and they can't get out. The biggest issue with Fuse's ultimate is that you can quite easily walk out of the ring of fire as it is getting placed, so keep note of this, as any experienced player will more times than not just run out of this area before the fire does get fully activated. Also, players can very easily jump over the wall of flames if there is any sort of elevation change or if a building is nearby, so again, just understand that the fire is more of a pressure and movement tool than necessarily a straight up damage dealer. One way to create pressure, apply relief, or burn enemies is going to be the indoor ultimate strategy. Since Fuse's ultimate has an arc from that cannon where it is launching, generally the ultimate is best used outdoors for the maximum flexibility and range. However, you can also quickly run into a building and just rip that ultimate right on enemies camping in a room or a doorway. This is going to force them to either get hurt real bad or prevent them from pushing in, letting you reset your team if needed. If you are outdoors and you want that ultimate for more than just fighting or lighting someone on fire, you can use that ability to purely recon and look at areas. You also have the capability to aim down sights with the ultimate in hand, as it does more or less give you a 3x binocular zoom to see what is happening around you. The ultimate does last on the ground for 17 seconds, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to track, but a very easy thing to remember is to know that the fire is going to go away around 15% of a recharge, so keep this in mind. Also know that this percentage will change if you do have a gold helmet on, and in this case, it is 20%. If you're looking to make a team that revolves all around Fuse and making plays, you can combo Fuse's abilities, specifically the ultimate, with legends like Caustic and his ultimate gas grenade, Horizon and the black hole to prevent them from escaping the fire or even pulling them into the fire. And in general, using grenades while enemies are in the ring of fire is great, and as is using Fuse's tactical clusters. Fuse in today's meta is fairly interesting. He absolutely has both pub and ranked viability, but in terms of the pure team aspect, he doesn't really bring a ton of typical team play, but his abilities definitely benefit from a well-coordinated, aggressive team fighting squad. He is somewhere right in the middle of the pack, high B tier, maybe even low A tier, depending on the player. And Fuse today is far superior than what he was upon his release in Season 8. If you want more ways to improve your skills as Fuse and at Apex in general, check out this video right here. Hit that like button. Until next time, happy gaming, legends.